Okay, good morning, everybody. Sorry for that. I sent the email a little bit late, so maybe that was confusing. But in any case, happy you're here and happy to continue the journey. Genesis chapter 1. We were discussing the creation of man. The good news is that we're going to continue a little bit today, but the story does not conclude with the verse we're discussing now, because in chapter 2, the Torah returns to the story of creation of man and gives us more details and different perspectives. So we're going to get back to that. But in any case, we're still at story number 1, chapter number 1, day number 6. Toward the end of day number 6, we discussed the creation of man. Last week, we discussed the seemingly strange detail that we get during the creation of man. The first thing that God says about the creation of man is that he will rule over the animals. Why is that important? We discussed that last week. And then verse 29 and 30 discuss the menu, right? You create a human being, and the first question the human being has is, what's for lunch? Right? My kids finish lunch at whatever the time is, 12 o'clock. Next question is, what's for supper? That's the way humans are. They want to know what they're eating. So God creates man, and then the first thing he tells man, not the first thing, the second thing he tells man is what he's going to eat. And God says in chapter 1, verse 29, see that I give you all the grass, etc. I'm not going to read the verse, but in any case, what we see from here, and Rashi's takeaway from these two verses, is that we see that man was not given the permission to eat animals at this point until after the flood. And in fact, the verse seems to equate the human being and the animals in the fact that they both eat the grass, they both eat vegetation, but the human being does not yet eat animal life. How are we to think about it? There's two perspectives. One perspective is that this represents the person is on a higher level, and therefore the person does not eat living beings, does not eat flesh of animals. And only after the flood, when the person descends, does the person descend to the extent that they actually eat meat. That's one perspective. And then there's the opposing perspective that the opposite is true, that at this point the person is not able to elevate the animals and therefore cannot eat it. And only later does the person grow spiritually to the point where he could elevate the animals. So there's two perspectives on that. We'll discuss it at length, maybe in the future when we get to the story of where God does in fact say he could eat the animals. We'll elaborate upon it there. Now we're at the concluding verse of day number 6. So this is chapter 1, verse 31. And it's sort of a summary. Vayar Elohim, God saw it, kol asher asa. God saw everything he has done. In other words, we're not talking about a specific creation. Hinei tov ma'od, and behold, it was very good. Vayera vayivoka yom hashishi, it was evening, it was morning, the 6th day. So here we see sort of a general statement. So we want to unpack this verse because there's a lot of significance, a lot of interesting meaning within this verse of the sort of the summary of day 6, but it's really the summary of all of the story of creation, because it says God saw everything and it will behold, it was very good. So the first thing we want to understand is, before we get to the general, let's look at some of the details. First of all, it's the first time that the Torah uses the term very good. All other days it says, all other creations it says tov, good. Here it says very good, me'od. In Hebrew, me'od comes from the word strong. In other words, you're emphasizing the good is very good. It's interesting, we mentioned it last week, is that creation of man, it doesn't say that it was good. On the 6th day, in the first half of the 6th day, when it talks about the creations of the animals, it says at the conclusion of verse 25, it says that God saw that it was good. That was the animals. When it comes to the human being, it doesn't say it was good. It doesn't say anything. And we discussed last week that the reason why some interpretations offer, the reason why it doesn't say that human being is good is because the human being has free choice. And therefore, we really don't know whether or not the creation of human being is good. It's really up to the human being, him, her, or herself. Therefore, the Torah specifically does not say it was good in the creation of the human being. But there's another interpretation, and this is the Gemara. Comes from the Gemara. The Gemara says that when it says Tov Me'od, it was very good. Says the Talmud, even though it does say that the conclusion of the day of the sixth day, and it says that it's concerning everything God made, but the Talmud nevertheless says that we are referring to the human being, and the Talmud says something interesting. The Talmud says, Tov, good, is the good inclination. Very good, Tov Me'od, is the evil inclination, is the Yetzer Hara, is the evil inclination, or another version is the Talmud has, the Medrash has one version, the Talmud has another. Tov Ze, very good, is the angel of death. Same idea. Good is what we think of good. Very good is what we think of as evil. And this is, of course, very strange. How could you tell me that the evil inclination is very good, meanwhile the good inclination is only good? And this is a very beautiful Jewish concept. And the concept is that the true good comes from the transformation of the negativity. So if you're just doing good, that's wonderful, that's very good. But to be very good, or really we could translate it as intensely good. Intensely good, me'od is very, but me'od comes from it means it's intense. Intensely good only happens through the transformation of negativity, and within the human being, the negative soul, the negative part of self. So it's well known. The Mishnah explains on the verse that we say in the Shema every day. The verse says, "V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha," love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. So the Mishnah says, what does it mean? Love the Lord your God with all your heart. B'chol levavecha, and there's an extra vase. It could have said b'chol libcha levavecha. So the Talmud says, what's with all your heart? With all your heart means with both parts of your heart, with the good inclination and with the evil inclination. That's what the Mishnah says. You don't have to learn Kabbalah to get that concept. And our job is not just to love God or to touch the part of ourself, to get in touch with the part of our soul that loves God, but it's much deeper. What we're supposed to do is to transform the evil inclination to the love of God. And if you do that, that's very good. Why is it very good? So the reason why it's very good is because ultimately the selfish side of self is actually much more intense than the spiritual side of self. The metaphor that the Kabbalah uses, based on the metaphor that King Solomon uses, is v'rav tvuot b'koach shor. There's a lot of grain comes from the power of the ox. And that's a beautiful metaphor, because you ask yourself, who is more powerful, the ox or the human being? And of course, the human being is smarter, so the human being can get the ox to plow the field. But ultimately, if the human being had to plow the field, there would be no bread. And when the ox if you could channel the ox to plow the field, then you'll get a lot of bread. And the same thing is within the interpretation of this metaphor, is that the godly soul is very spiritual, but the godly soul is not as strong, because to be strong, you have to be in love with self, and you have to really want what's good for self. But the godly soul is humble. So even if the godly soul wants God, but whatever it wants, it doesn't want with that same intensity, right? I want to make a confession here. I want to study the whole Talmud. Does it mean I'm going to do it? Maybe yeah, maybe no. But if my animal soul wants something, the intensity of that desire is much, much stronger. Now, if I could transfer that intensity from the animal soul to the godly soul, in other words, direct that intensity toward the love of God, then it's not only good, but it's very good, or intensely good. And that is what the Shema tells us to do, according to the interpretation of the Mishnah. And that's what the rabbis are telling us, that when the Torah says intensely good, you cannot find intensity in the godly soul alone, because the godly soul is too humble. So if you want intensity, you have to go to the animal soul, the selfish soul. And then you transform the selfish soul to love God, and then you have intensely good. Another angle here is, how do you get your animal soul to love God? My animal soul loves cotton candy, or fill in the blank of whatever your cotton candy is. How do you get the animal soul to change and transform and love something that's so abstract? So we mentioned this in the past, that it's not such a great leap, because the difference between the godly soul and the animal soul is the godly soul wants to transcend. It wants to escape the self and return to its source. So there's no question the godly soul wants to connect to God. What does the animal soul want? The animal soul wants what's good for it. Okay? So it thinks what's good for it is cotton candy, so it likes cotton candy. It thinks what's good for it is physical pleasures, so it likes physical pleasures. The leap you have to make with the godly soul is not, with the animal soul, is not that profound. You don't have to teach the animal soul to be selfless. That would be almost impossible. But what you do have to teach the godly soul is it actually tastes good. It's actually pleasurable to connect to God. And if you do that, you're not asking it to do something that's against its nature. Because what is its nature? Its nature is to love itself, to take care of what's good, to seek pleasures that make it happy, that make itself feel good. Well, if you could transfer the pleasure and elevate the pleasure and present a higher form of pleasure, then you transform the animal soul, right? It's like a child that doesn't want to grow up. Why not? Because when he grows up, he's not going to be able to play in the sandbox, because he's 6 years old or 5 years old. He sees that only children are in the sandbox and no adults are in the sandbox. So he says, I don't want to grow up, because if I grow up, I can't play in the sandbox. And it's a very deep concern. Speak to your children. If you have young children or grandchildren, ask them about it. I'm telling you, this is a deep trauma. No, but they don't want to grow up because they're going to have to give up their toys. What's the truth? The truth is that when you grow up, you give up the sandbox, but you get more expensive toys. You buy yourself an iPad, you buy yourself other things, and then your toys actually become a little bit more elevated. And the same is true with transformation of the animal soul. We're not telling the animal soul not to seek pleasure. We just introduce it to higher forms of pleasure. And that's how you get not only good, which is the godly soul, but intensely good, tov me'od, which is the transformation of the animal soul as well. One more point on this. One more point is, it's very interesting that me'od, the word intensely, me'od, tov me'od, very good or intensely good, the letters of me'od is the same letters of Adam, right? Me'od, mem, aleph, daled. And what's Adam? Man, aleph, daled, mem. So in other words, what the metaphor is, you have to scramble. If you scramble the words very and very good, you get to man, you get to Adam, because only man could get to the intensely good, but through his free choice. And the way you do that is through scrambling. In other words, moving things around. What are you moving around? You're creating that transformation where the animal soul also seeks godliness. So that's what we have. That's the first angle, the first bit of interpretation that we have here based on the interpretation of the Talmud, that this verse is really referring to creation of the human being. And when we say that it's very good, we mean creation of man is not necessarily good, because good is just a sort of holiness, but man is a sort of a combination of holiness and negativity. So man is much deeper than good. Man has the potential to become intensely good. How? If it transfers the intensity of the animal soul to holiness, then man is intensely good. So that's the first sort of angle, the first perspective that we're offering on this verse. We're going to continue on these words as well. But if somebody wants to make a comment or ask a question, go ahead.
Rabbi, yes, I would like to. I have another thought when he said it was very good. It's as if to say, well, man alone was not very good, but man in the totality of the environment I have created, if he knows his place, proper place, that is very good.
I can only say 2 words. Jill, very good.
Yeah.
That was very good. That's going to be the segue into the next point. Very good, Jill. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, let's follow Jill. One of the most interesting things of verse 31 that we're reading now is, if up till this point, what did God say? God said individual creations are good. Light is good. On day 3, we said the fact that the earth, the waters gather and the earth appears is good. The fact that there's vegetation is good. The luminaries are good. The fish and the birds are good. The animals are good. Okay, that's specific creations. I can accept that. There are specific creations in this universe that are good. Verse 31, however, is saying something much more radical. What is verse 31 saying? You ready for this one? If I tell you this and I wouldn't tell you that's in the Bible, you would say, no, that's made up. Nobody in their right mind would say this. You ready? God saw that everything he made was very good. I ask you, did everything God make is very good? There's nothing in this world that God made that's not good. In other words, here, it's a much more radical statement. You're not saying there are individual creations that are creations that are good. You're saying kol asher asa, everything God made. And if everything God made is good, then that's a problem, because we look around the universe and we see evil, we see suffering, we see pain, we see hurt. So you'll tell me it's before the sin, so everything was tranquil and everything was harmonious. But I don't know if that's a perfect answer, because this is a big statement. It's saying everything God created is good. Everything He created is good. There's no potential for negativity. There's no potential for pain. How could you say that? How could God say this statement? That is a question that comes from that extra word, that little word. Hashem saw kol asher asa, everything He made. That little word kol, everything, is a big word. And to say that everything is good, that's a big leap. How do you get to that? So here we have what Jill mentioned, and this comes from, I'm quoting from Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. This is a very nice interpretation. First of all, we have to, before we get to the interpretation, there's another interesting word. The other interesting word is vihine, behold. When do you employ the word vihine, right? Vayar Elokim, God saw it, kol asher asa, everything He made. Vihine, behold, it's very good. What does behold mean? So up to this point, the Torah does not use that word behold. It doesn't say God saw the light and behold, it was good. No, the light is good. What's behold? So when do you say behold? Behold, you say when there's a surprise, when there's something unusual. That's when you say, wow, I'm shocked. Behold, something happened. Behold, there was something surprising here. Comes to mind when Abraham is about to slaughter Isaac and he lifts up his eyes and behold, he sees the ram. Oh, surprised. He didn't notice it before. All of a sudden now it's a surprise. So the word behold tells you there's a surprise. Says Rabbi Shamshon Raphael here, she says, look around the world and you see negativity. But if a person could see the kol asher asa, everything God made, and this is what Jill said, you can't look at an individual creation or an individual event in isolation. In isolation, not everything is good. There's pain, there's suffering. In isolation, not everything is good. But if you look at the totality of the creation with the purpose of creation, then you see that the pain is actually a step toward growth. And if the pain is a step toward growth, then you look at the totality and indeed it's very good. More than good, very good, because good only takes you so far. But if you overcome pain, you have actually a deeper understanding and a deeper experience. So here we have two interpretations. We say, look at everything God made, meaning don't look at an individual creation. Look at it in the totality of all of creation. And then you'll be surprised. Why? Because on the surface, it looks like it's negative. But you're going to say, Vihine, behold, I'm surprised. What I thought was negative now I understand is very good because I see it as part of the greater story. And part of the greater story, the negativity or the dip or the pain is here for a purpose of goodness. So now we did two things. We explained that Tov Me'od, that everything, Kol Asher Asa, everything God made is good, very good. It's very good if you see it in the context of the entire creation. And then we also explain why behold. Behold means I'm surprised. Why am I surprised? Because I'm looking at an event and I see it as negative. But if I look at it as it's in its totality, then I see it as positive. And this is, of course, true in all of philosophically, but it's also very true within every single person's life. Certainly when a person is living through difficult times. Maybe Corona is a good example for many people. I'm not saying many people are suffering. So if you look at an individual moment, you say this moment is not good. It's not good. So how are you going to make it through? How are you going to survive the difficult challenge, no matter what the challenge is? The only way you can survive the challenge and see it as good is if you don't look at this moment in isolation. You have to look at the moment as part of the entire story. And then you realize that it's possible that this moment is leading you to something greater. And if it's leading you to something greater, then it's behold, you're surprised to learn that not only is it good, but it's very good. So this is this teaching is very important and has great ramifications. How to view challenge, how to view difficulty. And again, am I looking at every moment of my day or at every day? Am I looking at it as in isolation, or am I looking at it as part of a greater story? And this is a beautiful interpretation from Rabbi Shamshon Fal here. She also uses it 2 weeks ago, or was how many weeks ago? Chukas Balak Pinchas. That I guess last Shabbos, not yesterday, but the week before. There's a verse that says, "Al ken yoimru hamoshlim bayu cheshbon," that the moshlim, the poets, the writers would say, "Come to cheshbon," and it's talking about the battle with Sichon and Og, and he talks about how the battle with Sichon and how the history writers wrote the history of that battle. Go look it up. It's 2 weeks ago. Parshas Chukas, the portion of Chukas in the book of Numbers. So Rabbi Shamshon Fal Hirsch has a beautiful interpretation. He says, what is a historian? Moshlim. What's a moshel? What's somebody who writes poetry or who gives a parable? What's the art of storytelling? And he says something beautiful. He says, what's the art of storytelling? The art of storytelling is you look at many random events, many events in isolation. If you're looking at events in isolation, it's no story, right? A person has, I don't know how many moments in their life, do the math. And if you just look at everything in isolation, there's no story and there's no meaning. How do you write a story? You have to look and see the connection and see how one point flows into the other, and you connect the various experiences or various details, and then you see that it's not a bunch of specific occurrences, but they all come together to comprise one story. That's the art of storytelling, right? If you want to write history, you can't say, oh, one event happened and another event happened. To write history is to tell a story. To tell a story is to show how events lead from one to the next and lead towards something specific. And that's a very important lesson in our life. We each have to write our own story. Write your own story means you have to look at what's happening in your life, not as an isolation, but as part of the greater story. And therefore, a challenging moment is not the whole story. It's leading you to the next chapter. What the next chapter is, that's up to you. We can't write the story for you because you have free choice. But this is a profound lesson philosophically in all of creation. Why did God create evil? Not in isolation because he loves the evil, but because it's part of the greater story to allow free choice, et cetera, et cetera. And in our life as well. Why do we experience negativity and challenge and hardships and obstacles? It's part of a greater story to allow us to overcome and to dig deeper and to reach an even a more profound perspective. So that's the Vihine, that's the behold. And if you look at everything, look at it as part of a greater story, then it's going to be not only good, but intensely good. And you will be surprised because you look back and you see that something that you thought was indeed an obstacle, and it really turned out to be an opportunity. So this is the story of Vihine Tov Mod, and behold, it's very good. That is the next angle. So we just explained so far. The one angle is Talmudic angle. That very good, we're referring to the animal soul, which is if you can get the intensity of the animal soul to love God, then it's going to be very good. That was one interpretation. And then we had Jill's interpretation, which was the interpretation of Rabbi Shamshon Fal Hirsch, that the interpretation of Shamshon Fal Hirsch, that you have to look at creation in totality, and therefore even what is negative is only negative in isolation. And like someone wrote to me that Gamzu Latova, anything that happens, the Talmud says, you say, this too is for the good. But what does it mean for the good? It means Litova, literally to the good. It leads to something good. But that's only, you have to be able to see, to look, not at the event, not at the pain, but at the overarching story. And if it's the overarching story, you will discover the good in it. So this verse is actually telling you how to see good in the universe, not by looking at an individual creation, but at looking at the totality of the creation and also within your own life, as we discussed. This is profound in my view, in my opinion. Take it or leave it, but I think this is deep. In other words, if I could only live this way, I would have a good life. And now is the easy part is to talk about it. To do it, that's the hard part.
Rabbi, does the explanation that in the phrase that it's very good refers to the point that it was a purpose of creation of human being? It's like the artist makes the final touch on the painting.
Okay. You want to take me there? I'll go there. Fine. I'll say again, very good.
I mean, was it included in some sort of the Hirsch's?
No, but it's a different angle. It's the Kli Yakar. Kli Yakar also has to get mentioned here Sunday morning. It is, after all, Sunday morning in Greenwich. We do have to mention the Kli Yakar. So thank you, Vicky, for leading us in the right direction. That was very good. says the Kli Yakar something absolutely brilliant, and I confess that I didn't know this till about last week, and it's unbelievable because you read the story so many times and you don't listen. You know, we think we know the story, so we don't listen. We're not listening. It's a big problem. The problem with the Bible is we know the end of the story. So it's like, yeah, the story I know. But if you have to listen like a child listens, like you never heard the story before, and then you start listening to new things. And there was when I was young, about 10 years old, that's when the Iron Curtain collapsed, and basically every Chabad bacher, every Chabad youngster from age 16 to 20 went to Russia. I'm just telling you what happened, and they all came back with all interesting stories, because they went to teach Judaism, and everyone went for a few weeks, but anyone you knew, age 16 to 20 or 18 to 22 was in the Soviet Union in those years, 1991, 1992, everybody was there. So somebody wrote, one yeshiva student wrote a book, and he wrote a book about his experience. I forget which town, and he describes how he was in shul this Shabbos morning, and he's telling the story. He has an interpreter who speaks English and Russian and interpreting, and he's telling the story about it's just really Genesis, that parsha. And it happened to be the parsha of when Jacob thinks he's marrying Leah, and it ends up marrying Rachel. So he's describing, he's just Shabbos morning, he's not even, he's just saying the story sort of just, how he remembers it from kindergarten. And he's saying the story, and he says, and he married Leah, and then in the morning, behold, he married Rachel, and he says, in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he says, the entire shul goes, what? And he realized that it's actually a surprising story. He never, this is the first time they ever heard the story. If this is the first time you ever heard the story, you're like listening. He was just saying the story without even listening to what he was saying. But if it's the first time you heard the story, it's a crazy story. So what am I saying this? I'm saying this, we keep knowing the story, so we're not really listening. So why am I'm saying this for the Kli Yakar. Says the Kli Yakar, he says, Vayara Elokim ki tov. What does ki tov mean? We know what tov means. Tov means that it's good. What does ki tov mean? Ki tov means, they translated it into English, God saw and it was good. Well, Jill Yolen is here. Jill will tell you that ki is not and, right? Ki has an interesting meaning. Ki has 4 meanings, and is not one of them. So what the Kli Yakar says, it's absolutely unbelievable. Kli Yakar says, ki tov, ki is conditional. For example, ki tetzei la'milchama, if you go out to war, ki tavo, or when, it's conditional. It's if, it's when, but even when is conditional. So what does it mean, ki tov? Ki tov doesn't mean God saw that it was good. It's not what it says. I know that's what your preschool teacher taught you, but it's not what it says. It says God saw ki tov. It could be good. It could be good. It's conditional. Where does God say, and it is good? In this verse, vihine, and behold. Vihine is behold, but vihine is present tense. It's not conditional. Vihine means it is there. At this point, it's good. And this is the point that Vicky was making. The Kli Yakar also says it. He says that when creation was created, it only has the potential for good. In other words, creation is neutral. Is it a good idea to create the light? Is it a good idea to create the rest of creation? I don't know. It could be good. It could be a good place. It could be a good place. But the hine, I'm battling the elements here. The hine tov ma'od means The hine tov ma'od means that now it becomes good when man comes around. It becomes very good when man comes around, because that is when he could play out the purpose. If you think about the entire creation like a theater, so people work very hard to set up the stage and set up the sound and set up the lighting, and I'm not sure what else they do for theater or for plays, but I think is Ken. If Ken is here, Ken will fill me in of all the things you need to run a play. So people invest millions of dollars, and they put in a lot of time and money in costumes, and lighting, sound, music, everything. Was it a good play? Well, it depends. It depends what story you're going to tell. It depends what the actors do, right? So you walk in and you say all the creation, all the props and all the preparations and the stage. You say Kitov. It could be good. This could be good. This could be a good story. Is it good? I don't know. Once the actors come onto the stage, even before they acted, you say Vehine. Now we have, in actuality, it's so funny. In actuality, we have the potential for good. In other words, now we have people who could make it very good. So that was Vicky's point, and that's what the Kli Yakar says. Everything else, Kitov, it could be good. You made a nice stage, you bought a nice theater, you made a nice stage, you bought costumes, you bought art, you bought music, whatever you did. Yeah, Kitov, it could be very good. The actors come, the hine. Now it's very good because now you can fulfill the purpose in the metaphor of the play. The purpose is the play. In the interpretation of the metaphor, in the purpose of creation, if the human being lives up to his purpose, then all of creation is good because it fulfills its purpose. So that's why all the other 6 days, next time you go to Shul and the rabbi says and God says it was good, no, what the Kli Yakar says, that's not what the Torah says. You're being fed a wrong interpretation. It's not what it says. Kitov means conditional. Hine, behold, it's very good. Oh, the actors showed up. If the actors showed up to the scene, then that's very good. Not that it is good, but it could become good. Now we're dealing with something in the present, something could become good. Before then, it's just the stage, it's just the props. Props are wonderful, they could be very good, but they're not good. They're not good in their own sake, right? Nobody would invest the money to say, okay, we're gonna build the stage with beautiful props and we're gonna sell tickets. No one's gonna come to your show that way. I think. If I'm wrong, and if you're here, let me know. Yeah, I think you are here. Okay, fine.
Just one more point, Rabbi, is that, and it's basically adding to what both Jill and Vicky said, is that until this moment, it's sort of like a jigsaw puzzle with man being the last piece in the jigsaw puzzle. It was the aha or the Vehine moment, because
Yes.
we're talked about the up and the down and the earthly and the heavenly. It's only man that could add that third dimension to this jigsaw puzzle. Only
Correct.
man with his freedom of choice can elevate the earthly to the heavenly. And,
Indeed.
And I imagine you're going to also mention the ha shishi, the hey on the shishi as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So just to touch upon what Bob says, Vahi Erev. So there are different ways of reading it, I'm not sure exactly what Bob was referring to, but some versions, not.
It's Yom
our version.
HaShishi, the last two words.
Yeah, our version of Kiddush. When we say Kiddush, we start Friday night. There's a mitzvah to sanctify the Shabbat. In other words, to welcome Shabbat by welcoming it verbally. That's the mitzvah of Kiddush, sanctification. So when Shabbat starts, you have to say, welcome Shabbat, in whatever language you use. And when Shabbat leaves, you do the same. We call it Havdalah, the separation, the ceremony of after Shabbos. The rabbis instituted that we do it with a cup of wine. So that's called Kiddush. We sanctify Shabbat by making a blessing on the wine. What do we read? So we say a blessing. Before the blessing, we read verses from the Torah. Which verses? We begin by chapter 2, verse 1, that we're about to read. Vaychulu hashamayim, and the heavens and the earth were concluded. That's how we read. The problem is that we also start Yom HaShishi. We start the Kiddush with the last two words of verse 31. So Kiddush is verse 32. I'm sorry, chapter 2, verse 1 and 2. Chapter 1, 2, and 3, in fact, right? So we read that whole section of how the heaven and earth were concluded and God rested. That's the Kiddush. But we don't start with the seventh day. We start the 6th day, Yom HaShishi, the 6th day. We start with the last two words of 31. And why do we do that? At least the Sfardim do that, and Chabad, I believe other people do it as well. I believe the Ashkenazim do it as well. The Kabbalistic reason is that Yom HaShishi v'Yechulu Hashamayim, if you take those 4 words, the 6th day and the heavens was completed, has the 4 letters of Hashem's name. Yom HaShishi, Yud Hey Vav Hey, and that's Hashem's name. And we'll talk about Hashem's name, how that's only introduced on the 7th day, meaning the purpose of creation only comes about the 7th day. There's another interpretation, and that could be what Bob was alluding to, that the Talmud says that Yom HaShishi, the 6th day, represents a different sixth day, represents the sixth day of Sivan, the sixth day of the third month, and that's the day that people receive the Torah. And the Talmud says that all of creation is up in the air. We're not sure whether it was a good idea until the sixth day. In other words, this sixth day, it refers to the future sixth day, the sixth day when the Jews accepted the Torah, and that's when the all of creation is confirmed, when God says it actually was a good idea to create it because the purpose was here. It's like you invested all that money in the play, and the actors show up and they say, oh, sorry, we don't want to act tonight. We don't want the story. We don't like the story. We're going home. If that happens, then the sixth day of creation is purposeless. So the way the Medrash writes it with drama, all of the earth is sort of shaking and trembling, waiting. All the 6 days of creation are waiting to be sort of confirmed and liberated by the sixth day of Sivan, when the people will accept the Torah and give the earth its purpose. And like Bob says, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and the jigsaw puzzle, there's different pieces, and some pieces are beautiful and some pieces are not beautiful. But if you put them all together, then even the non-beautiful parts contribute to the beauty of the painting. And that's really what's happening here with day 6, with the conclusion of day 6, with this verse, how everything is good. Okay, so far we said 3 big points. I'm not going to review them because I already said them. Okay. Okay, we're talking about purpose because Bob brought up purpose. So we'll go to the next verse and talk about the purpose. There is, like everything else, is always a big grammatical problem. I don't know who wrote this book. No, I'm kidding. Whoever wrote this book did so with many grammatical problems, and each grammatical problem is either because the writer, was asleep at the wheel, or he was drunk, or he was trying to embed meaning. So follow whichever version you want. I have my own interpretation, but I may be biased. So take it or leave it. The problem with the sixth verse, with the next verse is as follows: Vayachulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am. Vayachulu means the heaven and earth and all their hosts were completed. So again, if you want to talk about the Shamshon and Paul Hirsch interpretation, how you have to look at the universe as one whole, all the aspects of life, or all the aspects of creation as one whole. So he has an interesting interpretation. It says literally the heaven and the earth and all their hosts. V'chol tzva'am. I have no idea what hosts means. Host means armies, at least in the Hebrew. We talk about Hashem. Isaiah talks about Hashem as the Lord of hosts. Host is armies. What kind of armies? Heaven and earth and all their armies. I had no idea that earth has armies, or the heavens have armies. Okay, now you have satellites in heaven for space warfare. So maybe there's armies in heaven. But at this point, what does it mean armies? You want to say earth with all its creations, heaven with all its creations. That I understand. But what does tzva'am? What does tzva'am mean? Tzva'am means their hosts, their armies. What does that word mean? So Rabbi Shamshon Paul Hirsch says an interesting concept. He says that tzava, what's an army? What's the root of the army? What is the army? Why do we use that word? We also use it referring to the Jewish people. Jewish people leaving Egypt, we say that day, all tzivot Hashem, the armies of God left Egypt. At that point, you weren't an army. I mean, we didn't know how to fight. Why the army metaphor? So the Shamshon Paul Hirsch says that in Hebrew, the word army doesn't mean necessarily for battle. Army simply means when you have a multitude of things organized around one single organization principle. In other words, there's an organizing principle around which many people organize. That is what army means. And therefore, you can use it for an army going to battle, where we're organized around the concept of going to battle. You can refer it to the Jewish people leaving Egypt, means that the Jewish people are a people organized around the concept of becoming God's nation. So sort of a nationality is an army. And also creation could be an army, could be a tzva'am, if you see all of creation organized around one organizing principle. Now, today we understand that the same laws of nature apply everywhere in the entire universe. But back when the Torah was written, people didn't see it that way. People saw the world and nature as fragmented, and they didn't see any unifying, connecting concepts between all aspects of nature. So when you say that, the heaven and earth and all their hosts were completed, what does hosts mean? Host means that you see the heaven and earth as part of, organized around one principle. What is that principle? Principle is their purpose. What's the purpose? Purpose is God. Purpose is that the human being fulfills God's will but that's all only possible. You can only employ that word, tzva'am. You can only employ the word hosts if you see that all the various components of creation are organized around one principle, namely their purpose. So that's how the same idea appears in that verse as well. Okay, we continue. We get to a bigger problem. The next few words is problematic. God concluded on the seventh day the work which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Okay, so the real question becomes is, did God create anything on the seventh day? And what they told us in preschool and Hebrew school, and what the verse seems to be saying, at least the second clause of the verse seems to be saying, that no, God did not create anything on the seventh day. On the seventh day was the day of rest. The problem with that interpretation is the first clause of verse 2 says, God concluded on the seventh day, which means he concluded on the seventh day, not on the sixth day. He didn't finish working on the sixth day. God concluded on the seventh day. Seems like he did work on the seventh day and he concluded on the seventh day. So which one is it? Yes.
Rabbi, what was the tense of the verb conclude?
Past tense. Vayachal, he concluded.
So he concluded. So was it active? Because if it was concluded, that would indicate it was concluded before. But if it's concluded in which past? Is it the perfect tense?
Bayom is on the seventh day. Bayom hashvi'i. Not before the seventh day. Bayom hashvi'i. On the seventh day, God finished. On the seventh day, he finished. If I say,
okay, so he was still
Jill,
working.
I ask you a question. Jill, I ask you a question. I ask you. You made a jigsaw puzzle. You made a puzzle. You bought a 1,000-piece puzzle. You finished a puzzle. I call you up. I say, Jill, when did you finish it? You say, me? I finished it on the seventh day.
Well, then I would have said if I had finished it by the seventh day or on the seventh day. If I finished it on the seventh day, I put the last piece on the seventh day.
Right. So that's a problem. That's exactly what it sounds like. You finished it on the seventh day, not the last minute of the sixth day. Not you were done on the seventh day, but you finished. Vayachal, you finished. It's an active word. It's a verb. You finished on the seventh day. So that's a problem because we know that there were 6 days of creation. So what exactly happens here? Just to show that it's a problem, I'm going to show you that there are two interpretations of Rashi. Because this is a legitimate problem. Did God create on the seventh day? So the first interpretation, I must say, is not great. And I think Rashi agrees with me. That's why he brings a second interpretation. Says Rashi as follows. Rabbi Shimon says, a man of flesh and blood, a human being, does not know exactly his moments. In other words, you're not completely in control of your time. You can't finish on this a nanosecond. Therefore, a human being has to add holiness has to add from the weekday to holiness, meaning to say you can't stop resting on Shabbat at the nanosecond that Shabbat starts because you don't know how to calculate the nanosecond. Therefore, you have to stop working a few minutes before Shabbat and add Shabbat, make some of Friday holy, meaning start resting when there's a few moments left of Friday, because you don't know how to stop at the last moment exactly, because we can't pinpoint the exact nanosecond. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, knows exactly his times, and therefore he stops exactly on the, literally, Chut HaSaira. Chut HaSaira means on the here, right? Exactly on the border. But at the nanosecond, we can't do it. God can do it. The problem is, because God stopped at the last possible nanosecond, it appears as if God concluded on the seventh day. What's Rashi doing here? Rashi has a problem. On one hand, we know God rests on the seventh day. He didn't work. On the other hand, we know that it says God concluded on the seventh day. So what does Rashi say? Rashi says he didn't really conclude the seventh day. He concluded the last nanosecond of the sixth day, and therefore it looks as if he concluded on the seventh day. You like that interpretation? It works, I guess, for some purposes, and therefore Rashi quotes it, but it's not, Rashi has to add another interpretation. Rashi says his other interpretation is very interesting, and that's just, it's more of a metaphor, and it's more of a spiritual one, more abstract, and therefore all the other interpretations that are added are basically an elaboration of Rashi's second interpretation. What is Rashi's second interpretation? He says, God concluded the earth in 6 days, but the earth was missing something. What was the earth missing? The earth was missing rest. When Shabbat came, rest comes. What does Rashi just do here? Rashi says, of course, God created something on the 7th day, but he didn't create something actively. He didn't create something physical. He didn't create anything tangible. What was created and introduced to the world on the 7th day was something intangible. It was rest. It was the cessation of work. And therefore, you can have it both ways. God didn't create anything tangible, but was something introduced in the 7th day that we didn't have in the 6th day? Was the earth incomplete in the first 6 days? Of course, because the concept of rest had not yet been introduced. So the 7th day, God introduces and creates rest, but you can also say that God created nothing on the 7th day because nothing tangible was created. What was created? Almost the opposite of work, the cessation of work. So here we have it both days. Fascinating concept, because we look at rest as just, it's just a negative concept. You're not doing any work. It's not active, it's passive. But here we're saying, no, rest has to be created. And God creates the rest on the 7th day, and therefore you can have it both ways. He didn't create anything, but he did conclude on the 7th day. Not on the 6th day, but on the 7th day, because according to his second interpretation, God did in fact conclude the work on the 7th day. 6th day, the world was not ready. Why? Because everything else was created, but rest was not created. Only on the 7th day, when rest was introduced, then you could say God created on the 7th day. Okay.
Rabbi, may I ask you a question?
Of course.
I have several actually questions, and these are questions that always bothered me, and I'm not sure they ever discussed. But they're general, but still they're related to what we just discussed about 7th day. And the questions are this, mathematical. Why God created 3-dimensional world? Why not 2-dimensional? Why not 4-dimensional? That's the first question. Second question, is God himself 3-dimensional? And final question, which relates to what we're discussing, does God, is time applies to God as well? So did God ever change past or the future? And that could explain, if time doesn't apply to God, maybe that explains to him, he just created time. He's not completely sure what's 1 day, what's 6th day, what's 7th day, but he's sure that by the 7th day he finished it.
Okay. I don't know the answer to most of your questions, but I do know the answer to is God limited by time? And the answer is that it depends. It depends what you mean by God. In other words, it's going to tie into what we're saying here. God himself, the essence of God, transcends time. In fact, the name we use for God in the Torah, the name that we don't pronounce, the tetragrammaton, we don't say the name. We call it Hashem, the name, or we say Adonai, which means the Lord, but we don't say God's name, God's essential name. That has a name that has 4 letters. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Those are 4 letters. We don't pronounce it. That is not introduced into the story of creation until chapter 2, until verse 4 or 5. So that name, the essential name of God, transcends time. In fact, in other words, God's essence transcends time. In fact, what the name means, what does the name mean? What kind of 4 letters? Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, what do they even mean? So the Kabbalists explain that those 4 letters are the letters that make up the words Haya, there was, Hoveh, there is, and Yihiyeh, will be. In other words, was, is, and will be. In other words, those 4 letters are the letters used for all the tenses, past, present, and future. And when you say that God's name is all 3 of them combined into one word, what you're really saying is the only thing we could tell us about God is that God transcends time. And of course, if God transcends time, you're the mathematician. If God transcends time, God transcends everything we can understand, because everything we understand is within time and space. If God is outside time and space, God is this transcendent God. And that is God, that's the essence of God. The problem is that name of God is not present in creation. In other words, if you comb through the first 32, 30, 34 verses of the Torah, it doesn't appear. It only says Elohim. Elohim, as we discussed, means God as he limits himself and expresses himself in the natural order. So the scientists will see Elohim, will see God as God expresses himself in nature. And Elohim does not transcend time and space, because nature is time and space. So when we look at creation and say, what did God create? God did not create things that transcend time and space. Everything God creates is within time and space. Then we say, and this is what we're leading to, then we say that's the tangible world that we can understand. Then we say there's something intangible, something transcendent. And that transcendent is not introduced yet in the sixth day of creation, because sixth day of creation is about looking at what God created. But then there's the seventh day. And the seventh day is we introduce ourselves, we are introduced to the concept of rest. Stop dealing with nature, see if we could transcend nature. And therefore on the seventh day, only once the seventh day comes about, do we introduce the name of Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is the name that transcends. And the idea is nature stops on the seventh day, nothing new is created, but we sort of get in touch and we try to connect, we try to think as much as possible. We can't understand it, but could we connect to the transcendent God? Could we connect to that which transcends time and space? And that's really what spirituality is from the perspective of the Torah. Could you connect to God's essence? And God's essence transcends. So within the story of creation is all about time and space. And therefore, the sixth day, the seventh day, there has to be a division. So Rashi's first interpretation is, well, he stopped at the last second of the sixth day, and we are creation, so we can't differentiate between 6 and 7, so we call it 7, but it's really 6. Not a great interpretation. But the second interpretation, here Rashi is speaking the Kabbalah, but he's speaking it in more simple terms. He's saying you have the tangible, 6 days of creation, the tangible was created, and then you have the intangible. Intangible means, he calls it rest. But all the other commentaries that follow Rashi elaborate on that point. What does it mean, menucha? What does rest mean? Rest means stop working, stop being within nature. Could you connect to the transcendent God, and that transcends time and space, but we access it, even though for God it's all week you can get to the essence of God. But the way the creation was set up, it's easier for us to access that element of creation on the seventh day. So that is, we're going to elaborate upon this because that's the name of Hashem, which will be introduced on the next page. But we begin with Rashi begins sort of gently. He says the intangible, and this metaphor of work versus rest. And rest is also a creation, but it's a different form of creation. It's a spiritual creation. And if the world only has the 6 days, and it's missing rest, it's missing the intangible aspect of life, the art aspect of life, the rest aspect of life, then it's missing. So by ceasing to create the tangible, God introduces the intangible, and then the intangible is part of creation, but it's not the same creation as the 6th day. So therefore, both statements are true. God only created tangible on the 6 days, correct? But God also concluded on the 7th day, but not by creating tangible. Creation means tangible. So by ceasing to create, he creates. By ceasing to create the tangible, he introduces the intangible. That's really what's happening here in the second interpretation of Rashi. Now let's speak simply, because some of us, myself included, are tangible people. So I asked Jill about the jigsaw puzzle, and I asked Jill, Jill, look, if you finished the puzzle on Friday, are you going to say you finished it on the 7th day? She says no. But I'm going to ask you a different question. Forget about a puzzle. Puzzle's not the best interpretation. Let's say you want to build a home. And it takes you 6 days to build a home. By the way, send me your contractor. No, not 6 days. Let's say 6 years. Okay? 6 years to build a home. And everything is concluded to the last drill. You know how it is. You build a house. The contractor, if he finishes 96% of the house, you're lucky. For the next 10 years, you have to finish the last 4%. But let's assume you got a good contractor and the house was created perfectly. You don't have to do anything. Every screw is tightened by the end of the 6th day or the 6th year or any time. So I call you up and I say, "Nu, is your house concluded?" So yeah, my house is concluded. But that's not the perfect answer, because your house is not concluded until when? Until you're sitting on the couch. In other words, what do you mean is the house concluded? You mean are the bricks and mortar in place? Yeah, the bricks and mortar are in place. But the house is not a creation of bricks and mortar. The house is a home. The house has a purpose. The purpose is that you should live there. So in some sense, until you introduce the purpose, the house is not ready. So yes, every last screw is tightened, but is the house ready? The house is not ready. It's not concluded. Did it conclude? No, it's not ready to, ready is a tricky word. Ready means you didn't start yet. But did you finish? Did you conclude did you conclude the project? Let me ask you a question. Okay. Did you conclude the project? The Torah uses the term vayachal, he concluded. Is the project concluded? The puzzle metaphor that we used earlier, yeah, the puzzle's metaphor when you put in the last piece, the puzzle metaphor is concluded. But I say, you have a building project, you're building your home. Is the project concluded? No, it's not concluded until you're living in the house. Until the purpose has been introduced. If the purpose is not introduced, then even if the bricks and mortar are in place, that the project is not concluded. So now we say, God concludes the project on the seventh day. Why? Because the seventh day is the day where we get in touch with the purpose of creation. For all 6 days, we're running around creating, trying to make a living, we're trying to grow potatoes, we're trying to increase the stock portfolio, trying to get the 401k to grow a little bit. This is all technical, physical things. Just like God creates the world, we also have to create the physical aspects of life. But the purpose, when do we sit back and say, I'm going to rest? But what does rest mean? Rest really means, let's not get distracted by the technicality. What's the purpose of all of this? I work all day so I can come home on the couch and sit down on the couch and say, what is my life really about? In other words, what is everything else here to serve? So that's what purpose means. And the purpose, we get in touch with the purpose on the seventh day. And therefore, the project is not concluded until you introduce purpose. And that's the big idea of day 7. That's why it's phrased in such a funny way. On one hand, it sounds like God did not do any work on the seventh day. On the other hand, it says explicitly the work was concluded on the seventh day, meaning it finished on the seventh day. Because the work, when it says the work was concluded, it means the project was concluded. And the project is not concluded when you finish creating the 6 days of creation. The project is concluded once the purpose is introduced, going back to Bob's point. So here's where the things come together. That will be enough for today. Just to summarize a little bit of what we spoke about. We spoke about the Vehine, the totality. Creation is very good when you see it in totality. You don't look at every individual creation in its own. You see how the challenges actually lead to something greater. That was one of the big points. We also discussed the concept of Tov Me'od, how a person is very good, a person could intensely good. The godly soul, the holiness is good, but if you can get the selfish side of self to actually want to do good, then what you're doing is you're creating intensity because the selfish side of self has more intensity. And then we discussed the concept of seventh day, and we started explaining that the seventh day is when the purpose is introduced. And if the purpose is introduced, then that's when that's when the work is concluded. Because again, what do you mean by work? Tangible work was created in 6 days, but the intangible work, the purpose, was on the seventh day. And when your house is not ready, when the bricks and mortar are done, your house is ready, the project is ready when you're actually living in your house. Okay, let's see if anybody, creation is ongoing. So how can you say creation is concluded? Very good question. If creation is ongoing, how could you say that creation is concluded? Excellent question. For the answer, you have to come back next week. So I know you'll be here. Cliffhanger. The question is, if you can't sleep at night because this question bothers you, text me and I'll be sure to send you the short version of the answer. But the question is that if nature is continuous, that's what a Hasidic concept, that God has to continuously create. So what does it mean that God can stop creating? If God stops creating, we should also return to nothingness, as elaborated in Hasidic writings and specifically in the Tanya, in the second section of Tanya. So if you want to know why we're not nothing and we still exist, even though God ceased to create, for that you have to come back next Sunday and you'll know why you exist.
Rabbi, I have a question about the word work. There are different words for work in the Bible, and I don't have the Bible in front of me. So when he says God, finished his work, is that just the common meaning of physical work? Is that the same word that's used for physical work?
Yeah. So in general, in the Bible, there's 2 words for work. One is avodah and one is milacha. And avodah comes from the word, related to the word avodah is eved, is servant, which means it's an emphasis on physical labor. A milacha doesn't have to be physical labor, it's creative labor. and which explains something that a lot of people have a lot of trouble with about how the Judaism defines work for Shabbat. So typically we think of work as exerting effort, and we say that effort, we equate effort with work, and therefore it's very strange to people to learn that according to the rabbinic tradition, on Shabbat you are allowed to exert effort, but you're not allowed to be creative work. You can't do things that are easy, like strike a match or write 2 letters, even though it's not labor intensive. Meanwhile, there are other things that are labor intensive and they're permitted. If you ever went to Chabad, and because we have a small shul, you have to set up the tables after the davening before the kiddush. A lot of work to start schlepping tables. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's almost inconsistent with the day of rest. But you're allowed to schlep tables on Shabbos. Why? Because in Jewish law, when we say work, we don't mean the exertion of effort. We mean creative work. And you get it from the fact that every time it says that God created or God rested from work, it does not use the term that describes physical labor or physical effort, because for God to create does not take any effort, because it's easy for God to create. In other words, it's not hard. But so therefore we have to rest just like God rested. What did God rest from doing? God rested from creative work. So therefore we have to cease from creative work. God did not rest from physical labor exertion of labor, because God doesn't have exertion of labor. So therefore, when we want to be like God and we want to rest, we don't rest from actual physical labor, we rest from creative labor. So that's the term milacha, and that's used here and all over the Torah. Every single time where Shabbat is used, it always uses the term milacha.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Sorry?
Rabbi, isn't then malacha also learning Torah and interpreting Torah?
So the question becomes, are you allowed to work? Well, if you're not allowed to work on Shabbat, then all the rabbis are violating the Shabbat. They're learning. They're working really hard. And if a person studies Torah, also you're going to say that they're working hard. The answer is that we're not creative in the physical sense. In other words, when I say creative work, means I'm creating something, creating a change, a permanent change in the physical world, a change in your mind, a change in your heart. These are things that are intangible that you're not only are you allowed to do, but that's what you were supposed to do. That's what Shabbat was designed for. Shabbat was designed to stop exerting your creative powers, spending your creative powers for physical accomplishments, and reserve the creative power for spiritual creations. So you're allowed to do that. It's going to tie into the answer of how does God cease to create? How do we exist? So we're going to elaborate upon this next week, God willing, in good health.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi, one question. Aren't we really serving our purpose, though, in the 6 days of work when we're engaging the world and bringing the mundane and making it holy, and on Shabbat kind of withdrawing from that?
Provided it's a Ratzav Hashuv, it's running and returning, that each one influences the other. The purpose is to be able to connect Shabbat, the influence of Shabbat, into the 6 days. But if you're just operating in the 6 days and you're not connecting to the transcendent holiness, then how are you going to elevate the 6 days? Right? You're just in nature. So when you touch the transcendent energy of God on Shabbat, then on the 6 days you could influence the 6 days. And it works both ways. So of course, the purpose ultimately is to refine the 6 days, but there still is holy and mundane. And the purpose is that the holy should influence the mundane. But we can only get in touch with the transcendent aspect of godliness, not only, but one time we get in touch with the transcendent aspect of holiness on Shabbat. Now, of course, every single thing includes everything. So there is also Shabbat every day, right? Study Torah is considered Shabbat. The Talmud says that a Torah scholar is Shabbat. So if you're sitting Sunday morning and you're studying Torah, that's the moment of Shabbat that you have during the 6 days. And then that moment will give you the energy to influence and elevate the other aspects of your day. So, but there is certainly the purpose is not to remain the 7th day. If that would be the purpose, God would just create the 7th day. You don't need the first 6 days. Ultimately, we have to create the puzzle and the jigsaw and connect the 6th day to the 7th day. Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Rabbi, can I ask that you send?
Of course.
Can you send me the YouTube video? I'm sorry I came late this morning.
Yes, God willing. Yes.
Actually,
Okay, thank you,
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi,